The general stopped a few steps behind me, close enough that I could hear him without turning my head. "Sergeant, that's a 2,500-meter shot," he said evenly. No disbelief, no drama. Flight time is nearly 4 seconds. At that hang time, wind will push you 10 feet off center. I stayed prone on the gravel, cheek welded to the stock. The Chaytak settled into my shoulder. I breathed slow, counting heartbeats instead of seconds. No one else spoke. They didn't need to. The range had gone quiet in the way it does when everyone realizes this isn't a demonstration anymore. The general continued, still calm, still technical. "With that platform, the bullet goes transonic around 2,300 meters. After that, you can't predict stability." "You're guessing." "Wind call," the spotter murmured beside me. 3 mils left," I said. "Gusting." The general shifted once, boots crunching lightly, then stopped. He wasn't challenging me now. He was evaluating whether the risk made sense. I adjusted without lifting my head. Mirage flattened, bent, then lied. I waited. Pressure does not belong in the equation. Waiting does. If this failed, the conclusion would be clean. Equipment limits. Environmental drift. No excuses. If it worked, there would be no celebration, just a quiet recalculation no one would announce out loud. I let the rifle finish settling. Took the slack out of the trigger. Counted one more heartbeat, then felt comfortable. Then I waited for the moment to arrive on its own. Subscribe to my channel, Hidden Sniper Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was stationed at Red Valley Training Annex in 2024, a place most people never bothered to remember. It sat between low scrub hills and dry riverbeds in eastern Nevada, far enough from anything recognizable that the desert did most of the talking. No famous units trained there. No press visits. No ceremonies. Red Valley existed for distance, quiet, and margin. That was why it mattered. I worked third shift in the armory. Weapons maintenance and ballistic support. Inventory, torque checks, optic leveling, zero verification. The kind of work that only gets noticed when it goes wrong. Most soldiers stop learning your name after the first week. I was fine with that. Anonymity is useful when your past does not fit neatly into a job description. Before Red Valley, my assignments never stayed clean long enough to explain themselves. I moved between units under temporary tasking orders that rarely lasted the length they were supposed to. Precision support. External attachments. Roles designed to solve narrow problems without creating new ones. You learned quickly not to ask where the edges were. You learned faster how to stay inside them. Those years taught me habits that never faded. How to read wind without flags. How to trust math without worshiping it. How to wait without drifting. Most importantly, how to accept that recognition and survival rarely travel together. When that phase ended, it did not close. It folded inward. I was reassigned quietly into positions that looked ordinary on paper and stayed that way on purpose. Red Valley was supposed to be a pause, a place to exist without being needed for anything beyond competence. I leaned into routine. Sleeves down, voice level. Answers short. I logged serial numbers, cleaned actions, trued mounts, corrected optics that had drifted from heat and transport. I let people believe that was all I did. Belief is a form of camouflage. The rifle that night was not standard issue, a Chaytak platform configured specifically for extreme distance work. 60 minutes of angle built into the base, glass rated for long flight times. Everything about it favored patience over speed. It was broken down on the bench in front of me, every component laid out in order. Clean. Exact. Treated like a tool, not a symbol. The inspection was not scheduled for my shift. That alone made it stand out. Inspections usually came with notice, time for daylight when everyone was awake and presentable. That night, the sound of boots echoed down the armory corridor without warning, polished, confident. the kind of stride that assumed the room would adjust around it. General Thomas Avery entered with 2 aides and a senior non-commissioned officer. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. People shifted automatically. He did not look at me at first. His attention went straight to the rifle. He stopped at the bench and leaned in, eyes moving over the setup. He noticed the cant in the scope base immediately. The elevation range, the ballistic card taped inside the case. He asked about torque values, about the optics tracking reliability at high elevation, about the cartridge selection. These were not trick questions. They were the kind asked by someone who understood what he was looking at. I answered plainly. No filler, no stories. He nodded once, processing, then finally looked up. That was when he saw me. There was a brief pause as the picture recalibrated. Night shift armory tech. Third shift, not who you expect to see behind a rifle configured for extreme distance. His eyes dropped to my sleeve, to the small stitched marking most people ignored. 2,500 meters. He did not laugh. He did not dismiss it. He studied it the way you study a data point that complicates planning. His skepticism, when it came, was technical. That distance puts the projectile transonic before impact, he said. Stability becomes unpredictable. Yes, sir, I said. He waited for elaboration. I did not give it. He asked where the shot had been taken. I told him it had been reviewed and validated. He asked who certified it. I said higher command. He asked why none of it appeared in my visible record. Compartmented tasking, I said. External support. That answer changed the temperature of the room. Compartmented meant intentional. It meant someone had made a decision about what did and did not need to be known. The general nodded once and ordered my file accessed, not aggressively, procedurally. The aide moved to the terminal and began typing. The system responded immediately. ACCESS denied. Top. Secret. Secret. The SWI. Nuforn. Read on. Required. The aide tried a secondary pathway. Same result. The general leaned in and read it himself. His phone vibrated almost immediately after. He looked at the screen, hesitated, then stepped away to take the call. His voice dropped. The conversation was short, but the effect was not. When he returned, his posture had changed slightly. Not defensive. Corrected. That was the moment the night shifted. Red Valley stopped being just a quiet base in the desert. It became a place someone had chosen carefully. Long sight lines. Stable terrain. Minimal interference. I was no longer just an armory tech working third shift. The pause I thought I had earned was already ending. And the system, quietly, had begun moving again. Something in the general's posture told me the inspection had already crossed a line. He was no longer confirming compliance. He was narrowing uncertainty. His questions stopped circling the room and started cutting straight toward the rifle and the person maintaining it. He asked why the optic was dialed that high when the range's known limits were lower. Why the ballistic data accounted for spin drift and Coriolis effect when most shooters never worked far enough to see either matter. Why the rifle case held wind charts for distances that exceeded anything scheduled on the training calendar. These were not accusations. They were probes, meant to see whether the answers lined up with the equipment. I answered the same way I always did, short. Exact, no extra words. Behind him, a few soldiers shifted their weight. One smirked, then stopped when he realized the general was not playing along. People are quick to underestimate what they do not understand. They are slower to back away once they realize someone else does. I kept working while I spoke, hands moving in the same steady rhythm. Cloth over steel, no pause. No show. Competence looks boring when you are used to it. The general stepped closer to the bench. He noticed the small things. The even wear on the bolt lugs, the lack of tool marks. The order the components were laid out in, not just clean, but sequenced for reassembly under stress. He did not comment. He did not need to. His eyes were already asking better questions. Then he saw the stitching on my sleeve, 2,500 meters. He did not react the way people expect. No laugh. No scoff. He read it once, then again, then looked back at the rifle. His skepticism stayed technical, which made it more serious. At that distance, he said, you're past stable supersonic flight. Transonic turbulence will eat consistency. You can't predict tumble. Yes, sir, I said. He waited, like he expected me to argue. I did not. Wind does not care about arguments. Neither does air density. He asked where the shot had been taken. I told him it had been reviewed and validated. He asked who certified it. I said higher command. He asked why none of it appeared in my visible service record. Compartmented, I said. External tasking. That word landed differently than the others. Compartmented meant deliberate. It meant information had been cut on purpose, not misplaced. The general nodded once, then made a decision without announcing it. Pull her file, he said to the aide, not sharply. Procedurally, the aide moved to the terminal and typed. I felt the shift immediately. Anyone who has spent time around classified systems recognizes the moment boundaries assert themselves. There is no drama to it, just a line you cannot cross. The screen responded instantly. ACCESS denied. Top. Secret. A secret enough worn. Read on required. The aide frowned and tried again, slower this time. Secondary credentials. Same result. The general leaned in and read the message himself. He did not argue with it. Systems like that do not care who you are. They only care what you are cleared to know. His phone vibrated in his hand. That was the part that mattered. He glanced at the screen and stepped away from the bench, putting space between himself and the rest of us. His voice dropped when he answered. I did not hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Scrolled, careful. The sound of someone being told to stop pulling on a thread. The call did not last long. When he came back, the mood in the armory had changed. Conversations that had not even started died before forming. No one wanted to be the next person to say something unnecessary. Rank does not protect you when systems draw lines you cannot see past. The general looked at me again, this time without assumption, not as maintenance, not as support, as an unknown variable that had been intentionally placed somewhere quiet. He did not apologize. He did not explain the call. He did not need to. Instead, he asked a single question. Can you demonstrate process, he said, without shortcuts? It was not a challenge. It was an evaluation. Yes, sir, I said. I told him I could run a live range demonstration at maximum available distance. Full safety protocols. Environmental data logged from multiple points. Qualified spotter. No spectators inside the danger arc. No promises. Just procedure. I made it clear I was not offering proof. Proof invites argument. What I wanted was clarity. Doubt spreads through units quietly. It slows decision-making. It causes hesitation where there should be trust. I had watched it do damage long before anyone realized what was happening. The general listened without interrupting. He weighed the cost, time, resources, attention. Then he nodded. Set it up, he said. By the book. Orders moved quickly after that, but without noise. Range safety was notified. Senior non-commissioned officers were reassigned. A spotter was designated. The armory shifted from routine to intent without raising its voice. That kind of shift only happens when people sense something real is about to be tested. As preparations began, I felt the familiar weight settle back in, not nerves. Responsibility. I had tried to build a pause for myself at Red Valley. a place where I could exist without being pulled forward. But capability does not disappear just because it is inconvenient. As we moved toward the range, I understood what the general was already adjusting to. This was no longer about whether a shot could be made. It was about whether the system was ready to acknowledge what it had quietly kept in reserve. The general did not push in the way people expect authority to push. He did not raise his voice or lean on rank. He narrowed the problem instead. That was how I knew he was competent. His questions became fewer, but each one mattered more than the last. "How often do you work past 2,000 meters?" he asked. "How much correction are you holding for Coriolis at this latitude? Do you trust first-round probability, or are you planning for a correction?" These were not traps. They were filters. I answered without embellishment. Regularly, calculated, not guessed. First round only if the environment allowed it. None of it was false. None of it filled in the full picture either. In our world, complete pictures get people curious. Curiosity gets people killed. He studied my answers, not for confidence, but for consistency. People bluff with language. Professionals stay boring. I stayed boring. The aide returned again, tablet in hand this time instead of standing at the terminal. His expression had gone careful in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. "Sir," he said quietly, "the restriction is above installation authority. Compartmented access. Automatic notification was sent when we attempted read-on." That last sentence changed the room. Automatic notification meant eyes elsewhere were already on this. It meant the general was no longer the highest authority involved, whether he liked it or not. He took the tablet, read it once, then handed it back without comment. He did not look angry. He looked recalibrated. "I don't like surprises," he said, "more to the air than to me." "I don't create them, sir," I replied. "I manage margins." That earned a pause. Not approval, consideration. He asked what I would need to demonstrate process cleanly, not performance. Process. That distinction mattered. Performance can be debated. Process cannot. I told him maximum available distance. Environmental data logged at multiple points. Wind meters staggered downrange. Qualified spotter. Range safety oversight. No spectators inside the danger arc. No shortcuts. He asked how long setup would take. "As long as it takes," I said. Rushing invalidates the result. The people around us stayed very still. This was the moment where authority decides whether it will force an answer or allow one to form honestly. Most choose force. It feels faster. The general chose patience. "Approved," he said. "By the book." Orders moved immediately after that, but quietly. Range safety was notified. Senior, non-commissioned officers were reassigned. A spotter was designated without discussion. No one joked. No one asked questions. They did not need answered. The armory shifted from routine to intent without raising its voice. As we moved toward the range, I felt the familiar weight settle into my shoulders. Not fear. Responsibility. Fear wants escape. Responsibility wants precision. I thought briefly about Red Valley, about how deliberately ordinary it was. Quiet bases exist for a reason. They give people space to prepare without being watched too closely. Long sight lines. Stable ground. Minimal interference. Someone had chosen this place knowing exactly what it could offer if it ever mattered. That realization carried weight. It meant this moment was not as spontaneous as it looked. Someone had planned for this long before the general walked into the armory that night. At the range, the mood shifted again. Veterans feel that kind of change immediately. Conversations dropped off. Movements became economical. People took positions without being told. This was no longer a demonstration. It was an evaluation. I laid out my equipment slowly, wind meters placed at measured intervals. Temperature and pressure logged. Angle and elevation calculations written out, checked, then checked again. The range safety officer watched closely and did not interrupt. He recognized discipline that came from experience, not rehearsal. The general stayed back, observing without commentary. He asked no further questions. That told me he understood his role now. Interference ruins data. Good leaders know when to step out of the equation. As I prepared the rifle, the physical costs began to surface. Extended time behind glass strained my eyes. Holding calculations steady brought a dull pressure behind my forehead. My shoulder already carried the expectation of recoil. None of it mattered yet, but it would. People who have never done this think the work ends when the trigger breaks. It does not. The body keeps score. I went prone and let the world narrow. Glass, steel, air. Distance stopped being intimidating and became relational. Something to be negotiated, not conquered. Behind me, the general spoke once, quietly. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant." It was not permission, it was trust. I took a slow breath and let it out. This was no longer about proving anything. It was about letting discipline, preparation, and restraint speak without interruption. And once that process begins, there is no room left for doubt. The range felt wrong in a way veterans recognize before they can explain it. Not tense. Not loud. Compressed. Like the air had decided to hold itself together. Even the wind seemed cautious, sliding low instead of pushing hard. Conversations died on their own. Boots found stillness. People took positions without being told. I moved slowly, deliberately. Speed ruins data. I placed the wind meters first, staggered downrange at measured intervals. One close enough to feel honest, one far enough out to catch what the ground hides. One placed where most people would call it pointless. Wind lies differently at distance, and distance magnifies every lie. I logged temperature and pressure, calculated density, altitude, then checked it again. The numbers matched. That mattered. The range safety officer stood off my left shoulder, watching without comment. He did not smile or try to fill the silence. His eyes tracked the order of my work, the absence of wasted motion. He had been around long enough to know the difference between someone performing and someone preparing. This was preparation. A senior non-commissioned officer stood a few steps back. At some point, his attention fixed on the rifle. On the scope base, on how much elevation was already dialed in before a round had even been chambered. I saw his posture change, shoulders locked. Weight shifted forward slightly. Recognition arrives like that before understanding catches up. He did not say a word. No one did. Silence like that is not empty. It is full of expectation. I checked the CHATAC again, bolt clean. Lug seated. Optic level confirmed. 60 minutes of angle in the base, more available if the math demanded it. The rifle was built for patience, not speed. Heavy, honest. It punished sloppiness and ignored ego. As I settled in, the physical cost started to surface. Extended time behind glass pulls at the eyes in a way that creeps up slowly. A dull pressure built behind my temples from holding variables steady without letting them drift. I ignored it. You learn early which discomforts matter and which ones just want attention. I went prone and let my body sink into position. Elbows set. Bipod loaded just enough to stay honest. Cheek weld firm, but not forced. I let the rifle come to me instead of chasing it. That takes longer. It always does. Rushing here costs more than time. The spotter slid in beside me, close enough that we could speak without raising our voices. He had not said much since we arrived. That was a good sign. Experienced spotters do not fill space. They wait for it to speak. I looked through the glass and watched the mirage. It bent right, flattened, then bent again. False consistency. Wind does that when it thinks you are in a hurry. I was not. I adjusted elevation carefully, then stopped. Overcorrection is how people miss shots they should never have taken. "Wind call," the spotter said quietly. 3 mils left, I answered. "Variable. Copy." Behind us, the general stayed silent. I could feel his presence without seeing him, the way weight settles into a room. He did not shift this time. He understood now that pressure ruins outcomes. That was to his credit. Time stretched. Not seconds, not minutes. Space between decisions. I counted heartbeats instead of time. Heartbeats do not rush you. Breathing stayed slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Letting the body settle instead of forcing it. The wind pushed harder, then eased. I waited. Let it show its pattern. Let it commit. Waiting is not passive. It is restraint applied continuously until the environment gives you permission to act. For a moment, the armory flashed in my mind. Night shift, solvent smell. The quiet comfort of routine. The thought passed. Nostalgia has no place behind a rifle. The mirage steadied. Not perfect, honest. I made a small correction, barely perceptible. Then I stopped moving entirely. Muscles relaxed into the position, not loose, just settled. The rifle felt anchored, balanced. Ready. This was not about distance. Distance is just space. This was about timing. About knowing when the variables had narrowed enough to accept risk without inviting chaos. The spotter leaned in slightly. "Send when ready." I took the slack out of the trigger slowly. No anticipation. No rush. Just steady pressure building toward inevitability. My shoulder already carried the future weight of recoil. My eyes burned slightly from the glass. The headache pressed harder. That was the cost. I accepted it. I waited one more heartbeat. Then another. The wind held. That was all I needed. I finished the trigger press without changing pressure or breath. The break was clean and predictable, the way it always is when you wait long enough. The rifle drove back into my shoulder, heavy and controlled. Recoil rolled through my body and bled into the ground. The report cracked across the range and moved away toward the hills. I stayed exactly where I was, head down. Eyes still in the glass, hands steady. At that distance, nothing happens quickly. We waited. The range went silent in a way that felt deliberate now, like everyone understood that sound and meaning were arriving on different schedules. I watched the glass, listened to the air, counted heartbeats again. The spotter did not move. That told me everything. We waited. Then, far downrange, the impact arrived. A dull, distant sound that did not match the violence of the shot itself. Confirmation that distance had finished its work. Only after that did the sound of the rifle reach the target area, late and irrelevant. "Impact," the spotter said quietly. He paused, recalibrating his own disbelief. "Center mass." The range safety officer confirmed a moment later. Clean. No one cheered. No one spoke. Silence settled back in, heavier than before. Applause would have cheapened it. Words would have gotten in the way. I stayed prone a few seconds longer, letting the moment pass fully through me. You do not rush the aftermath. That is how emotion leaks into memory and distorts it. When I finally cleared the rifle and rolled onto my side, the ache behind my eyes was sharper. My shoulder throbbed. My jaw felt tight from clenching without realizing it. That was the price. Anyone who says shots like that do not take something from you has never waited that long for an answer. I pushed myself up slowly. Around me, people stood very still, recalculating what they thought they understood about limits. The rifle lay quiet beside me, exactly as it should. It had done its part. So had I. And now the system had to decide what to do with the answer it had just received. For a few seconds after the confirmation, no one moved. The range did not exhale right away. It just held, like everyone was waiting to see if the moment would demand something more. I cleared the rifle the same way I always do. Safety on. Bolt back. Chamber checked. Then checked again. Procedure does not change just because the outcome went your way. If anything, it matters more afterward. When I finally pushed myself up from the gravel, my body reminded me what the mind had ignored. The pressure behind my eyes had settled into a steady headache, the kind that comes from holding calculations in place too long without letting them drift. My right shoulder throbbed where the recoil had driven deep into bone. Not sharp pain, accumulated pain. The honest kind. The spotter sat up beside me and let out a slow breath he had been holding since the trigger broke. He looked at me once and gave a single nod. No smile. No comment. That nod carried more weight than praise ever could. It meant the process had held. The range safety officer walked the data through out loud. Distance confirmed. Wind logs matched. Impact location verified. Each line spoken cleanly, not for drama, but for record. This was no longer a moment. It was documentation. Only then did the general step forward. He stopped a few paces away, careful not to crowd the firing point. His expression was neutral, but his posture had shifted again. Not impressed. Not defensive. Adjusted. How repeatable is that? He asked. That was the right question. I told him the truth. At that distance, nothing is guaranteed. Repeatability depends on environment, time, and the shooter's condition. Given similar conditions and enough rest, the process would hold. Not every time, but often enough to matter. He asked how long before I could do it again. Not today, I said. Fatigue's already setting in. I did not apologize for that. Overconfidence ruins credibility faster than failure. He nodded once, accepting the answer for what it was. He asked about the physical toll. I did not soften it. Extended glass time strains vision. Mental load brings headaches, recoil stacks. Anyone who claims otherwise is selling something. Behind him, senior non-commissioned officers exchanged brief looks. They understood the subtext. Capability like this is not infinite. It costs something every time you ask for it. The general looked back toward the target area, then at the rifle, then at me. That distance changes planning assumptions, he said. Yes, sir, I replied. It should. Assumptions kill people faster than ignorance. If this capability was going to exist, it needed to exist honestly. He asked who else knew. I told him higher command already did. That attempts to access my file had triggered notifications. Systems do not watch quietly when boundaries are tested. As if on cue, his phone vibrated in his hand. He glanced at the screen and stepped away to take the call. This one lasted longer. His shoulders tightened partway through, then eased. When he returned, the air around the range felt different, less tense, more settled. A decision had been made somewhere out of sight. He addressed the range safety officer first, thanking him for maintaining procedure. Then the senior non-commissioned officers, acknowledging oversight and restraint. Only then did he look back at me. You're not misfiled, he said. You're intentionally placed. That sentence carried weight. It meant Red Valley had not been an accident. Third shift, the armory. The distances available. All of it had been deliberate. He told me my designation classified me as an external precision asset, not tied to a unit. Not advertised. Moved quietly when margins disappeared. Activated without ceremony. He did not dress it up. He did not pretend it was noble. You're not a story, he said. You're a solution. There was no pride in that statement, only function. Stories get told, solutions get used, then put away until they are needed again. Around us, the range began to return to routine. Targets were logged. Equipment was secured. People started moving again, careful not to linger. Real work does not end with applause. It dissolves back into procedure. The general told me there would be no local report, no internal brief beyond what was required. Those who needed to know already did. Those who did not would never hear about it. He asked if I had follow-on orders. No, sir, he nodded. You will. He did not ask if I was ready. Readiness is assumed in people like me. That assumption is both privilege and burden. As the group dispersed, the attention slid off me again as naturally as it had arrived. Visibility is temporary. Utility is permanent. I packed my equipment slowly, methodically. My shoulder protested as I lifted the rifle case. The headache pulsed steadily. That was the cost. I carried it without comment. As I walked back toward the armory, the desert wind picked up again, indifferent to what it had just allowed us to do. The system had asked a question. It had received an answer. Now it was already moving on to the next problem. The general did not linger after that. He spoke less, but every word carried weight. He asked no more questions about the shot itself. That part was finished. What mattered now was containment, how far the moment traveled. Who needed to know? Who absolutely did not? He stepped aside and made another call, this one without turning his back. His voice stayed low, clipped, professional. I caught fragments without trying to listen. Confirmation. Distance, platform. Condition of the shooter, no embellishment. No adjectives, just facts moving upward. When he ended the call, he did not look at me right away. He scanned the range, the personnel, the equipment being packed away. He was already putting the moment back into its proper container. That is what competent leaders do. They do not savor outcomes. They manage consequences. He finally turned back to me. There will be no local write-up, he said. No training brief, no discussion outside required channels. Yes, sir. He nodded once, satisfied with the answer. Then he added, your presence here was intentional. Your cover stays intact until it doesn't. That was as close to reassurance as this line of work allows. The senior non-commissioned officers began moving people off the range in an orderly way. No rush. No announcements, just the quiet reset that follows something serious. Targets came down. Data sheets were collected. Wind meters were powered off and stowed. The place returned to what it looked like before, even if it no longer felt the same. I finished packing my equipment and slung the case over my shoulder. The weight pulled at the ache already sitting there. My vision blurred slightly at the edges when I stood. I waited a moment until it cleared. Fatigue shows itself in small ways first. You learn to respect those warnings. The general watched me for a few seconds, then said something unexpected. Good restraint, he said. Most people would have tried to sell that shot. I did not respond. Selling is not my job. He seemed to accept that and turned away, already moving on to whatever problem had replaced this one in his mind. That was fine. That was how it should be. I walked back toward the armory alone. No escort, no conversation. The desert had cooled slightly, the heat bleeding out of the ground as the sun dropped. The wind had picked up again, careless and ordinary, like it had not just been part of something precise. Inside the armory, everything looked exactly the same. Same benches, same racks, same fluorescent lights humming overhead. Routine is resilient like that. I set the rifle case down, logged the return, wiped down the bench I had used. Muscle memory carried me through it. When the body is tired, habit keeps things clean. I was halfway through closing out the log when my phone vibrated. No caller ID. No preamble. Pack your gear, the voice said. Flight wheels up in 20. No explanation, no destination. Yes, sir, I replied. The call ended. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the words settle. 20 minutes was generous by some standards. Tight by others. Either way, it meant now. I finished the log entry, locked the cabinet, and returned the keys. I did not tell anyone where I was going. No one asked. They had learned, consciously or not, that there are moments when questions only slow things down. In the locker room, I changed methodically. Same order I always used. Gear first, clothing second. Nothing extra, nothing sentimental. I checked my bag twice, then a third time, not because I doubted myself, but because fatigue makes liars out of confident people. As I zipped the bag, the headache flared once, sharp and brief, then settled back into its steady pulse. My shoulder complained when I lifted the strap over it. I adjusted and moved on. Pain is information, not instruction. I left the building through the side exit, the one most people forgot about. The night air felt cooler now, thinner. Somewhere overhead, an aircraft passed unseen, its sound fading before it registered fully. Timing does that to sound, to meaning. The transport was already waiting when I reached the pad. No markings. Engines running, crew efficient and silent. I climbed aboard without ceremony and secured myself in a seat that had seen many people come and go without being remembered. As the aircraft lifted, Red Valley shrank beneath us. The ranges, the armory, the quiet corners where I had tried to build something resembling rest. From the air, it all looked the same as any other forgotten patch of ground. That was fine. Places like that are not meant to hold people forever. They are meant to hold capabilities until they are needed. I closed my eyes briefly as the aircraft leveled out. Not to sleep, just to let the vibrations settle into something familiar. Whatever came next would arrive soon enough. The system had already moved on. So had I. By the time the aircraft touched down, the headache had faded into something manageable. The shoulder ache stayed. It always does. Pain has a way of lingering when it knows it was earned. No one said where we were. They never do. The transfer was efficient, quiet, built around the assumption that explanations waste time. I signed where I was told, handed over what needed to be handed over, and followed a familiar rhythm that did not require conversation. New badge. Temporary clearance. A room that looked like every other room built for people who were not meant to stay long. Days blurred together after that, not because they were chaotic, but because they were deliberately uneventful. Briefings without narrative, training without spectators, long hours waiting for conditions that never quite lined up. That is how you know you are being staged, not rushed. The system does not hurry assets it expects to use more than once. I did not think about Red Valley much. Not out of bitterness, out of compartmentalization. You learn early that looking backward slows reaction time. Still, small things surfaced when I least expected them. The smell of solvent in a maintenance bay. The way fluorescent lights hum when the building settles at night. Those details stick because they are neutral. They do not ask anything from you. No one here treated me differently. That was intentional. I was not introduced. I was integrated. People knew what they needed to know and nothing more. They watched my work, not my face. They paid attention to process. That was enough. At night, when things went quiet, I felt the fatigue more clearly. Extended glass time leaves a residue behind the eyes. Long calculations leave tension in the jaw. You can train around it, manage it, but you cannot erase it. I stretched, hydrated, slept when allowed. Preparation does not stop just because you are not currently needed. A few days in, my name disappeared again, not from a roster this time, but from the paperwork entirely. No assigned billet, no fixed location. Just movement windows and contingency lines. I recognized the pattern. You do not anchor what you may need to move quickly. That was when it settled fully. I was no longer attached to a place. I was attached to timing. There is a cost to that. Routine erodes. Familiarity disappears. You live in readiness instead of comfort. Meals are functional. Conversations are brief. Sleep is opportunistic. You stop planning beyond what the next window allows. But there is also clarity. When your role is narrow and precise, you stop wasting energy on things that do not matter. You focus on variables you can control and accept the rest without argument. The world simplifies when you let it. One night, while reviewing wind data from a location I had not yet been told I would deploy to, I realized something I had not allowed myself to name earlier. Red Valley had not been taken from me. It had been loaned. A pause granted because the system did not need me yet. Not because I was done, but because timing had not aligned. That distinction mattered. It meant the quiet had not been an ending. It had been preparation. I closed the data file and leaned back, eyes closed, letting the mental load drain off slowly. Somewhere nearby, an aircraft spooled up. Somewhere else, someone was making decisions based on margins they hoped would hold. Sooner or later, they would need certainty instead of hope. When they did, the call would come without warning. Until then, I stayed where I was, doing the work no one talks about. Checking numbers, running scenarios, preparing for conditions that might never arrive. That is what being a solution looks like between problems. Invisible, patient, ready. I do not think about that shot very often. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was expected by people who plan for moments when margins collapse. Distance like that does not shock the system. It confirms what the system quietly prepared for long before anyone needed proof. The general understood that. So did everyone who mattered. Capability does not announce itself. Sometimes it works nights, sometimes it stays buried in routine until the timing is right. I went where I was sent next. Different ground. Different sky. Same math. Same patience. Wind still lied. Time still mattered. The mission never asked who deserved credit or whose name would be remembered. It only cared whether someone was ready when the window opened and whether the process would hold under pressure. People like to talk about strength in uniform as if it is loud, as if it needs rank, speeches, or recognition to exist. But the strongest people I have served beside were quiet, precise, willing to be overlooked until the exact moment they were needed. They understood that being seen is not the same thing as being essential. What stayed with me from Red Valley was not the number, the rifle, or the silence that followed the impact. It was the reminder that impossible is often just a placeholder word for poor preparation. Physics does not bend. It only rewards discipline when the timing is right. Somewhere tonight, someone is cleaning a weapon no one is paying attention to. Someone is running numbers no one asked for. Someone is preparing without applause, without certainty they will ever be called forward. And if the day comes when everything depends on that quiet work, I hope they are given the space to do it cleanly. Because the most dangerous assumption a unit can make is believing capability will always look the way it expects. Subscribe to my channel, Hidden Sniper Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.